Before you sleep tonight, let's sit with fear, not to be haunted, but to listen. Fear is often a misunderstood guest, showing up in quiet disguises, a shadow on the wall, a silence too deep, a thought that lingers longer than it should. We are taught to run from it, to block it out, to label it as irrational. But what if, for once, we didn't? What if fear wasn't always a monster, but a mirror, a teacher, a soft knock reminding us we're still human? In this room, there is no need to be brave. There is only the need to be still, to breathe, to wonder, to rest inside the stories we rarely tell ourselves aloud. You don't need to fight the fear tonight. Just notice it. Let it take shape, melt into words, and slowly dissolve into quiet understanding. This is not a horror story. This is a hollow room, and you're not alone in here. Thanatophobia. There's a name for it, you know? The fear of not existing anymore. It's called thanatophobia. Some say it's about death, but really, it's not just that. It's about the idea of vanishing, of not knowing what happens next, of being unable to imagine a world without you in it. It creeps in during quiet hours, when there's nothing left to scroll, no more small talk to fill the silence. It starts with a thought: what if one day I simply stop, and then spirals into a heavy kind of wondering. Will I be remembered? Will anything I've done matter? For some people, thanatophobia shows up as panic, a racing heart when they hear the word forever, a sudden stillness when someone mentions the end. For others, it's more subtle, a restlessness, a need to stay busy, a habit of clinging to memories or fearing goodbyes more than they admit. It's not about being dramatic. It's about being human. We're wired to survive, to keep going. So, the idea of a point where there's no more going, it doesn't compute. It feels like trying to read a book that's missing the last page. And maybe that's what bothers us most, not knowing how the story ends. Or worse, if it ends quietly, without anyone noticing it ever happened. We try to comfort ourselves with routines, with legacies, with the idea of something eternal. But even those feel fragile. We light candles on birthdays. We carve names into stone. We post and post and post, hoping someone sees. And when night comes, and it's just us and our thoughts, the question returns, not with screaming, but with a soft whisper. What if I just stop? The truth is, no one really knows what comes after, and that's okay, because thanatophobia isn't something to fix, it's something to understand. It reminds us that we care, that we want to live and connect and leave something behind, that we are not numb. So maybe the answer isn't in silencing the fear, but in listening to what it's trying to say, that this moment matters, that you matter, that being here, right now, is already something remarkable. Nyctophobia. Some fears arrive loudly. Others slip in when everything else gets quiet. Nyctophobia is one of those. It's the fear of the dark, not just the absence of light, but the feeling that something might be hiding inside it. For children, it often begins with a shadow in the corner, a shape that wasn't there before the lights went out. But for many, it never really leaves. Even as we grow up, the dark remains a space where the unknown waits. It's not just monsters or ghosts. It's the unease of not seeing clearly, of not knowing what lies a few steps ahead. The hallway at night feels longer. The door you left ajar seems to breathe. Your own reflection in a window starts to feel less like you. Nyctophobia isn't about weakness. It's about instinct. Humans are wired to rely on vision, to read faces, to search for threats. So, when darkness takes those tools away, the brain fills in the blanks, and it often fills them with fear. Some people sleep with a nightlight, even as adults. Some check under the bed, not because they expect to find anything, but because the act of checking makes the unknown smaller. Others keep TVs on low volume, not for entertainment, but so the silence doesn't stretch too far. Nyctophobia can also feel symbolic. The dark becomes a stand-in for everything we can't control. Uncertainty, loss, loneliness, the feeling that the world might keep spinning without us ever finding our place in it. And still, there's a strange comfort in the fear, because if the dark still scares you, it means you're still trying to see, still reaching for the edge of the bed, for the switch on the wall, for the voice that tells you you're not alone. Some people say, there's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light. But that's not entirely true. In the dark, your mind speaks louder, and sometimes it whispers things you've been trying to ignore. So maybe nyctophobia isn't just fear of what's out there. Maybe it's fear of what's inside, finally getting the space to speak. And maybe, on some nights, the bravest thing you can do is listen. Acrophobia. You don't have to be standing on the edge of a cliff to feel it. Sometimes, a second-floor balcony is enough, or a glass elevator, or even just watching someone else lean too close to a ledge. Acrophobia is the fear of heights, but it's not just about altitude. It's about vulnerability, about being up so high that you're no longer sure what's keeping you safe. Your knees tighten, your breath shortens. You feel the pull of the space below you, not because you want to fall, but because you suddenly remember you could. It's not irrational. The body has a built-in response to danger, and height triggers something ancient inside us, a survival instinct that whispers, step back. But with acrophobia, that whisper becomes a scream. The mind starts to race, imagining outcomes that haven't happened, slipping, stumbling, being too close to the edge, even when the railing is sturdy, even when you're not the one standing near it. Some people laugh it off, call it dramatic, but fear isn't measured by logic. It's measured by how fast your heart beats when the wind brushes too hard against your back. Acrophobia is rarely about just the physical height. It's about the realization that control is fragile, that the higher we go, the more we see how small we really are. There's a strange loneliness up there. The ground is far away. The people look like dots. And you, standing there, are suddenly aware of every breath, every muscle, every heartbeat trying to hold you steady. For some, it becomes avoidance. They skip hikes, tall buildings, bridges. They choose the stairs over the glass elevator. Not because they doubt the structure, but because they doubt their own reaction to it. And that's okay. Fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you aware, hyper-aware, sometimes. And maybe that's the hardest part. Being so attuned to what could go wrong that you forget to look around and realize what's still holding you. So, if your legs shake when you look down, or if your stomach drops in a dream where you're falling, know that you're not alone. Acrophobia doesn't mean you can't rise. It just means you carry the weight of perspective with you. And sometimes, the bravest thing is not standing tall. It's letting yourself come down gently, with grace. Thalassophobia. It starts with the surface, calm, endless, beautiful. But then your mind sinks just a little deeper, and suddenly, the beauty turns cold. Thalassophobia is the fear of deep bodies of water, oceans, lakes, the vast unknown beneath. It's not just the fear of drowning. It's the fear of not knowing what's underneath your feet, what might be watching, what has no name but feels near. You could be floating, weightless and still, and yet feel something ancient brushing past your legs. Even if there's nothing there, especially when there's nothing there. For some, it begins with images, dark blue nothingness, silhouettes of creatures too large to imagine, underwater drop-offs that fade into pure black. For others, it's the feeling of being suspended in a world not made for us, where movement is slow, sounds are strange, and vision is limited. You are not in control, and in the ocean, you never truly know how far down it goes, or what has lived there longer than us. Thalassophobia taps into something primal. We are land creatures, wired for ground beneath our feet. The ocean, though beautiful, does not belong to us. And that truth lingers in the back of your mind every time you look out at the horizon and feel both awe and unease. Some people avoid swimming, others avoid boat rides, even if they can't explain why. They'll admire the sea from afar, but the idea of being out there, surrounded by nothing but water, is too much. And maybe that's because the ocean reflects more than just light. It reflects how much of the world we still don't understand. It mirrors the fear of the unknown, of what lies beneath appearances. You could be perfectly safe in a pool or a bay and still feel the tug of dread that comes from imagining what could be lurking just out of sight. And that's what thalassophobia is. Not fear of water itself, but of depth, of mystery, of the vast quiet space that refuses to be explained. But maybe that fear reminds us we are small. And being small isn't always a bad thing, because it means we still have something left to wonder about. Something bigger than us, deeper than us, older than us. Something that humbles us, even when we're standing safely on shore. Claustrophobia. There's a kind of fear that doesn't come from what's outside, but from how little space there is to escape it. Claustrophobia is the fear of confined spaces, small rooms, locked elevators, windowless basements, crowded buses where you can't move your arms. It's the moment when you realize the walls aren't just around you, they're closing in. It's not just a dislike of tight spaces. It's a sudden surge of panic, as if the air is thinning, as if you might run out of oxygen even when you're breathing just fine. Your chest tightens. Your skin feels too close. You become aware of your heartbeat, of how far the door is, of how many steps it would take to reach it. Sometimes the space isn't even small. It just feels like it. A packed crowd, a narrow hallway, a stuck seatbelt. Claustrophobia turns ordinary situations into cages, and it doesn't wait for logic's permission. People with claustrophobia often avoid certain places. MRI machines, public restrooms with no windows, long tunnels. They memorize exits, sit near doors, make excuses to stay outside, not because they're being difficult, but because their minds equate confinement with danger. It's a fear of being trapped, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, of not being able to move when you need to, of losing control, and maybe that's the deeper root. It's not the space itself. It's what happens when your freedom feels like it's been stripped away, even temporarily, even harmlessly. Claustrophobia can also mirror internal states, feeling boxed in by expectations, pressured by choices, overwhelmed by things unsaid. The physical walls become metaphors for all the other places you feel stuck. And in that sense, claustrophobia isn't just a fear, it's a message, a reminder that you need room to breathe, room to feel, room to just exist, without explanation. So, if you've ever felt your world shrink around you, know that it doesn't make you fragile, it makes you human, sensitive to space, aware of boundaries, and longing for openness, not just outside, but within. And maybe, when the walls feel close, the bravest thing you can do is whisper to yourself, "I'm still here, and the space inside me is infinite." Anoclophobia. Crowds are supposed to feel alive, full of energy, movement, connection, but for some, they feel like too much, too loud, too close, too fast. Anoclophobia is the fear of crowds, not just being among people, but being overwhelmed by them, by the noise, the unpredictability, the loss of space that makes your body forget how to relax. It's standing in a packed train where every breath feels borrowed. It's walking through a festival and suddenly needing to escape, even if nothing's gone wrong. It's not about disliking people. It's about feeling like the space between you and them has disappeared, like your edges are being erased. Your thoughts become scattered, your heartbeat louder. You search for exits, not because you plan to run, but because you need to know you can. Anoclophobia isn't always obvious. It can look like turning down invitations, choosing the quiet aisle, waiting until the crowd thins. People might call it antisocial, but it's not about avoidance. It's about preservation, a defense against the flood of input that the body can't process fast enough. For some, the fear starts in childhood, a bad experience in a crowd, a moment of separation, of feeling lost. For others, it builds over time, a series of subtle overwhelmings that teach the body. Too many people means too much to handle. And in a world that constantly asks us to be on, to stay visible, to keep moving through packed schedules and packed spaces, anoclophobia can feel like resistance, like a whisper from within that says, "I need room." It's not a weakness, it's a boundary. And boundaries, when respected, become forms of self-trust. If you feel this fear, you're not alone. Many carry it silently, smiling in group photos while their breath hides behind their ribs. You can still connect, still belong, still participate in the world. You just do it best where there's space to breathe. And maybe the truth is, we all need that sometimes. Not because we fear others, but because we're still learning how to hold on to ourselves, especially when everything around us feels like it's moving too fast, too close, too loud, all at once. Social phobia. Some fears wear masks. They hide behind politeness, small talk, quiet smiles. Social phobia, also called social anxiety, is the fear of being judged, rejected, or humiliated in social situations. It's not just shyness. It's a deep, pulsing worry that something you say or do will expose you, that your voice will shake, that your words will land wrong, that everyone is watching, even when they aren't. For many, it starts before the conversation begins. The rehearsals in your head, the second guessing, the imaginary spotlight. You think, what if they don't like me? What if I sound stupid? What if I say too much or not enough? And when the moment comes, your heart speeds up. Your hands get cold. You scan every face for signs of disapproval. And after it's over, you replay everything, again and again, looking for mistakes only you can see. Social phobia can turn the simplest things into challenges. Answering a phone call, speaking up in class, making eye contact, even ordering food. It's exhausting, not because you dislike people, but because you care so much about how you're seen. Too much. Sometimes, people around you may not notice. You might come off as quiet, distant, or aloof. But inside, there's a storm of overthinking, a silent battle to stay calm, to appear normal, to not let anyone see the fear beneath the surface. And what makes it harder is knowing that most of what you fear isn't real. You know the room isn't staring at you. You know the mistake wasn't that big. But social phobia isn't about logic. It's about sensitivity, about feeling exposed, even when you're doing your best. Still, there's strength in that sensitivity, because it means you care about connection, about how you show up in the world. And that means there's room to grow, slowly, gently, at your own pace. With each conversation you survive, with each silence you allow, you prove to yourself that you are more than the fear, that your voice deserves space, even if it trembles. And maybe, one day, you'll realize the people you were most afraid of were probably too busy worrying about their own cracks to notice yours. Monophobia. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, a silence that doesn't comfort. Monophobia is the fear of being alone, not just physically, though that's part of it, but emotionally, mentally, existentially. It's the uneasy feeling that if no one's around, something might go wrong, that without someone else nearby, you might unravel. For some, it shows up when the house is empty. Every sound feels louder. Every shadow feels longer. You double-check locks, turn on background noise, keep your phone within reach. For others, it's not about safety, but presence. The need to know someone is there. That if something happened, if the fear inside became too loud, there would be another person to tether you to reality. Monophobia isn't the same as disliking solitude. Some people enjoy quiet walks or time to think. But when you're monophobic, aloneness isn't neutral, it's threatening. Your mind starts filling in stories. What if no one remembers me? What if something happens and no one notices? What if this silence never ends? You feel untethered, like a balloon floating too far from its string. You can be surrounded by people all day and still feel this fear creeping in, because it's not just about being alone. It's about feeling alone. The fear that connection is fragile, that you might not be able to reach out when it matters most. And in a world that often romanticizes independence, this fear is easy to hide. You joke about being clingy. You apologize for texting twice. You downplay how much you need someone to answer. But the truth is, wanting closeness is not weakness. Needing reassurance doesn't make you fragile. We're wired for connection. We're not meant to exist in isolation. And monophobia, in its own way, is a reminder of that. A reminder that your heart seeks witness, that you long to be seen, heard, felt, especially when things go quiet. So if you ever find yourself afraid of being alone, know that it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human, and the beautiful part of being human is that even in your loneliest moments, someone else has felt exactly the same. And maybe, just maybe, they're out there right now, hoping they're not alone in it either. Megalophobia. Some things are meant to be big, mountains, oceans, monuments. But sometimes, their size doesn't inspire awe. It causes something else entirely. Megalophobia is the fear of large objects, not just their scale, but their presence. Skyscrapers that loom over you, cargo ships that float silently, yet seem impossibly massive, statues whose eyes you can't quite meet. The fear isn't always easy to explain. After all, these things don't move. They don't threaten you directly. And yet, standing near them, your body tightens, your breath catches. You feel small in a way that's not comforting. It's disorienting, overwhelming, like being swallowed by something ancient and indifferent. Megalophobia isn't about hating big things. It's about the way they make you feel, powerless, exposed, reminded that you are just one fragile piece in a world that doesn't always make space for smallness. For some, it begins with images, giant machines, dams, planets, things too vast to take in all at once. The mind can't process them, so it retreats, fills the space with fear. For others, it's about proximity, walking beneath a bridge, standing near a cruise ship, looking up at a stadium. The closer you are, the more unreal it feels, like you've stepped into something you weren't built to witness. Some avoid these places, some approach, then quickly step back. Some feel the fear only in dreams, where cities stretch into infinity and statues turn their heads slowly. But the fear isn't always irrational. It reminds us of scale, of how little we control, of how vast the world is, and how much of it could exist without us. And that's not easy to hold. We like things we can measure, touch, understand. But megalophobia brings us face to face with the ungraspable, the bigness we can't shrink down. And maybe that's why it feels so intense, not because the object is dangerous, but because it reflects a truth we try to forget, that we are small. And being small is hard, but it also means we can move, adapt, disappear into quiet spaces when the world becomes too much. You don't have to face the giant thing all at once. You just have to breathe near it, feel your edges, remind yourself that size doesn't define significance, that even the smallest voice can carry weight, especially in a world that echoes. Trypophobia. It often begins with a picture, a seed pod, a honeycomb, skin that's been digitally altered. The reaction is instant, a shiver, a wave of disgust, sometimes even nausea. Trypophobia is the fear or intense discomfort caused by clusters of small holes or patterns. It's not always classified as a traditional phobia, but that doesn't make it any less real. For those who experience it, the reaction is physical, deep, uncontrollable. But why? Why does something as ordinary as a lotus seed pod feel so threatening? Some researchers suggest it's evolutionary, that our brains associate clustered holes with danger, infected wounds, decaying matter, disease. The fear, then, is rooted in survival. But for many, it's not about infection. It's about invasion. The sense that something is beneath the surface, that what should be whole is broken, pierced, infested. It triggers not just fear, but revulsion, a desire to look away, to scrub the image from memory. Some people laugh it off, but others feel it deeply. It shows up in dreams, in skin-crawling moments they can't explain. Even bubbles in pancake batter can spark that creeping unease. Trypophobia isn't about being squeamish. It's about sensitivity to visual chaos, a kind of hyper-awareness, a defense mechanism that reacts before your thoughts can catch up. You know it's just a pattern, just a surface. But Your body tells a different story. You feel invaded, even from afar. And maybe there's something metaphorical in that. The fear of things hiding in plain sight. The discomfort with things that look normal, until you look too closely. Trypophobia reminds us that beauty and horror can live side by side, that even natural patterns can feel unnatural when they push against our boundaries of comfort. And while it's easy to dismiss, it also teaches us something about ourselves, about how deeply our bodies remember what our minds have forgotten. So, if you've ever flinched at a sponge or felt sick at a photo no one else reacts to, you're not strange, you're simply tuned in. Your brain sees a pattern, but your body feels a warning. And sometimes, that warning is worth listening to, even if you don't understand why. Automatonophobia. There's something unsettling about faces that look human, but aren't. A mannequin in a department store, a wax figure that stands too still, an animatronic that moves just enough to seem alive. Automatonophobia is the fear of humanoid figures, things that resemble us, but fall just short of feeling real. It's not always a scream-inducing fear. Sometimes it's just discomfort, a shiver down your spine, a sense that something is off, even if you can't explain why. The eyes don't blink, the skin doesn't breathe, but the shape is familiar, and that's what makes it worse. Your brain wants to treat it like a person, but your instincts say no. This tension is what psychologists call the uncanny valley, when something looks almost human, but not quite, and that not quite becomes deeply disturbing. For some, the fear begins in childhood, a puppet that moved on its own, a costume character that got too close. For others, it's the silence, the fixed stare, the way these figures take up space without giving anything back. It feels like being watched by something that cannot feel, that mimics presence without truly being there. And in that mimicry, we're forced to confront the boundaries of what makes someone someone. Automatonophobia isn't just about fear of statues or robots. It's about what happens when identity becomes blurred, when life is imitated, but not lived, when emotion is absent, but suggested. The discomfort speaks to something deeper, the fear that connection could one day be manufactured, that warmth could be faked, that not everything that smiles is alive. In a world moving toward artificial intelligence, virtual personas, and lifelike avatars, this fear is becoming more relevant. We're surrounded by likenesses, by voices that aren't real, faces that are generated, and sometimes we feel that same chill, the recognition without relationship. Automatonophobia reminds us that what we truly seek in others isn't shape, it's soul, not presence, but response. So, if you've ever felt uneasy in a museum, or backed away from a perfectly still figure, know that you're not irrational. You're attuned to something fragile, the difference between being looked at and being seen. Phasmophobia. Some fears aren't rooted in what we see, but in what we think might be watching when we're alone. Phasmophobia is the fear of ghosts. Not always the kind with sheets and chains, but the lingering idea that something invisible might be there. Something not quite alive, but not fully gone. For some, it's strongest at night. A creak in the floorboards, a whisper of cold air, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. You tell yourself it's just the house settling, just the wind, just your imagination. But still, your body reacts. You freeze, you listen, you wait. Phasmophobia is not just about haunted houses or scary movies. It's about presence, the kind that can't be proven, but can be felt. The sense that something is near, just out of view. Watching, waiting, remembering. Sometimes it's tied to grief, to memory, to unresolved things we never said. The mind turns those feelings into shapes, into figures in the doorway, into weight at the edge of the bed, into eyes behind the mirror that vanish when we turn. For others, it's a deeper fear that the world is not as empty as it seems, that even in solitude, we're not alone. And while some find comfort in that idea, others find it unbearable. Because what if the past doesn't stay in the past? What if places remember? What if echoes never really fade? Phasmophobia isn't always loud. It can be a quiet dread, a refusal to enter the basement, a hallway you avoid at night, a hesitation before turning off the last light. It doesn't ask for proof. It asks for distance, space, avoidance. But maybe the fear isn't just about ghosts. Maybe it's about being reminded that there are things we don't understand, that not everything is explainable, that we are small in a world filled with stories older than us, and maybe, in some way, phasmophobia is a fear of memory itself, of being haunted, not by spirits, but by the things we once felt, the people we once were. So if you ever feel watched in a silent room, or pause before stepping into the dark, know that fear doesn't always mean something is there. Sometimes, it just means something within you is still waiting to be understood. Scopophobia. There's a strange kind of discomfort in being seen, not noticed in passing, but really seen, examined, observed, exposed. Scopophobia is the fear of being watched, of becoming the center of attention when all you want is to disappear into the edges. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up as a glance that lingers too long. A crowded room where every eye feels like it's waiting for you to trip. A camera lens pointed in your direction, even if it's not recording. For some, it's tied to embarrassment, the memory of being laughed at, judged, made an example of. For others, it runs deeper, the feeling that being watched means being measured, and being measured means falling short. The eyes of others become mirrors, and suddenly, all you see is flaw. You adjust your posture, you choose your words carefully, you rehearse smiles, not out of vanity, but out of fear. What if they misunderstand? What if they stare too hard and see something you've tried to hide? In a world where visibility is currency, where everyone seems to be performing some version of themselves, scopophobia feels like resistance, like a need to retreat from the spotlight, to reclaim your edges, to exist without being interpreted. Some people avoid photos, others struggle with stage fright, public speaking, even simple interactions in bright rooms. They walk through life as if under a microscope, and it's exhausting. Because it's not just about being seen, it's about being misseen, misread, misjudged. Scopophobia reminds us that vulnerability isn't always about what we share. Sometimes it's just about standing there, with nowhere to hide. And while some crave attention, others carry the weight of it like armor they never asked to wear. But there's also strength in that awareness, in knowing yourself so deeply that you notice even the smallest gaze, in protecting your boundaries, in choosing when and how you want to be visible. So, if you feel your heartbeat rise when eyes turn your way, know that your fear is not weakness. It's sensitivity. It means you care about how you exist in the world. and that means you're paying attention, even when you'd rather not be the one everyone's looking at. Achyphobia. Some fears don't show up as screams or shivers. They show up as hesitation, as overthinking, as the quiet refusal to try, just in case it doesn't go well. Achyphobia is the fear of failure, and it doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism, like procrastination, like walking away from something before it even begins. It's not about laziness or lack of ambition. In fact, it's often the opposite. People who fear failure tend to care deeply. They imagine every outcome, every ripple, every judgment that might follow a misstep. They hold themselves to impossible standards, not because they believe they're perfect, but because the idea of being less than perfect feels unbearable. Achyphobia whispers, what if you mess up? What if they laugh? What if you're not enough? And so, you stay quiet in meetings. You don't send the email. You let the idea sit in a folder, untouched, because safety, even in stillness, feels better than the sting of getting it wrong. But failure is not the monster we imagine. It doesn't always bring shame or ruin. Often, it brings clarity, growth, redirection. But fear doesn't work in reason. It works in reflex, in muscle memory shaped by old experiences, old wounds, a bad grade that felt like a verdict, a missed opportunity that turned into a regret, a voice that once said, "You should have known better." And even years later, that voice echoes. Achyphobia doesn't just block ambition, it shrinks joy, it dims curiosity. It tells you not to reach too far, not to hope too loud, because what if hoping makes the fall hurt more? But here's the truth. Everyone fails, quietly or loudly, in private or in public. It's part of being human, part of becoming, and the ones who seem fearless. They've simply learned how to fall and stand again. So if you feel this fear, know that you're not weak, you're not broken, you're simply someone who cares a little too much about getting it right. And maybe, just maybe, what you need isn't more certainty, but more kindness toward yourself, toward your stumbles, because failure doesn't define you. The courage to try does. Chronophobia. There's a fear that doesn't chase you. It carries you, quietly, relentlessly, second by second. Chronophobia is the fear of time, not of clocks or calendars, but of time itself, the way it moves forward, always forward, no matter what you do. It's the feeling that everything is slipping, that you're running out of something you can't even hold. For some, it strikes in quiet moments, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that another day is already gone. For others, it hits during milestones, birthdays, graduations, the start of a new year, each one reminding you how much has passed and how much you still haven't done. Chronophobia is the awareness that time is both invisible and unstoppable. You can't pause it, can't slow it, can't ask it to wait while you figure things out. It just keeps ticking, and the more you notice it, the louder it seems. The hands of the clock feel sharper. The calendar pages feel thinner. Even the sunrise feels like a countdown. For some, this fear is tied to aging, to the idea that the body will change, that opportunities will vanish, that doors will close quietly behind you. For others, it's about meaning. What if I'm wasting my time? What if I never use it well? What if I never become who I was supposed to be? Chronophobia can make you rush or freeze. You feel like you have to do everything now, or else nothing at all. You chase urgency, even when what you really need is rest. And yet, time doesn't respond to panic. It just keeps moving, whether you run or stand still. But maybe there's a gentler way to look at it. Maybe the fear of time isn't really about time at all. Maybe it's about presence, about wanting to hold moments more tightly because you know they'll pass, about fearing that you'll miss something important because you weren't paying attention. So, if you've ever felt the weight of a ticking clock, know this: you're not behind, you're not late. You're living on a path that unfolds second by second, breath by breath, and maybe the most radical thing you can do in the face of time is to slow down and feel it, without fear. Technophobia. Not all fear wears teeth and claws. Some of it glows, buzzes, blinks. Technophobia is the fear of technology, not just the machines themselves, but what they represent: rapid change, loss of control, the unknown behind the screen. It's the feeling that everything is moving too fast, evolving in ways we can't quite understand. You pick up a new device and feel instantly outdated. You hear about artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, digital clones, and your chest tightens. Who's making the decisions? Who's still human in all this? Technophobia isn't about hating progress. It's about being overwhelmed by it, about watching the world rewrite itself in code while you're still trying to finish the last sentence of your analog life. For some, it begins with small things: a phone update that changes everything, a camera that recognizes faces, a voice assistant that answers before you finish asking. For others, it's deeper: a fear that our reliance on machines is erasing something sacred: silence, patience, mystery. The more connected we become, the more some of us feel like we're disappearing, replaced, outsourced, reduced to data. And in that reduction, the question rises: what if I become invisible to the very world I helped build? Technophobia is not ignorance. It's sensitivity, a deep awareness that behind every algorithm is a choice, one we may not have made. It's the unease of watching automation creep into spaces once held by people. It's not fear of the machine. It's fear of the shift, of what we lose when convenience becomes king. But maybe this fear has value. Maybe it slows us down long enough to ask, what matters most? What do I want to preserve? Technophobia, in its quietest form, isn't about smashing screens. It's about longing for eye contact, for imperfection, for slowness. So, if you feel uneasy in a world of rapid downloads and constant upgrades, you're not falling behind. You're remembering something real. And maybe, in the tension between man and machine, your hesitation is the most human part of all. Pistanthrophobia. Not all fears come from the dark. Some come from light that used to feel warm until it burned. Pistanthrophobia is the fear of trusting others. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind humor, independence, silence. Sometimes it dresses up as strength, as logic, as I just don't get close to people. But underneath it all is a wound, one shaped like a handshake that broke, a promise that vanished, a person who once stayed until they didn't. Pistanthrophobia is not the absence of desire for connection. It's the presence of caution, a heart that remembers what happened the last time it opened too wide. You want to believe again. You want to lean in. But your mind whispers questions. What if they lie? What if they leave? What if I fall and there's no one to catch me? And so you hold back. You overanalyze. You test people. Sometimes without realizing it, you pull away when things get too good. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much to break again. For some, it shows up in relationships, always waiting for the shift, the withdrawal, the moment the other shoe drops. For others, it's in friendships, keeping things light, avoiding depth, saying I'm fine when you're anything but. Trust becomes a map filled with erased paths and warning signs. And every time someone offers kindness, your mind scans for the catch. But here's what's true. You are not broken for feeling this way. You are cautious, yes, but also hopeful. Otherwise, you wouldn't be afraid, because fear of trust only lives where trust still matters. And slowly, over time, trust can be rebuilt, not all at once, not perfectly, but in pieces, in late-night conversations, in small consistencies, in someone showing up when they didn't have to, and maybe, most importantly, in the moment you decide to try again, not because it's safe, but because it's worth it. Pistonthrophobia is a scar, not a sentence. And scars, though permanent, are proof that healing happened once and can happen again. Hypochondria. Sometimes the fear isn't that something is wrong, it's that something might be. Hypochondria, or health anxiety, is the persistent fear of having a serious illness. Even when there's little or no medical evidence, it doesn't mean you're imagining symptoms. It means your body's signals are louder. Every ache becomes a warning. Every heartbeat feels like a message. You search your skin for signs. You replay coughs. You feel a sensation and your mind builds a story. What if this is the start of something? What if they missed it? What if it's worse than they say? It's exhausting, not just physically, but emotionally. You want reassurance, but even reassurance doesn't last. You Google symptoms, even though you've promised yourself not to. You read forums, scan test results, schedule another appointment just to be sure. And when someone says, it's probably nothing, part of you believes them, but part of you can't let it go. Hypochondria doesn't come from vanity or dramatics. It often comes from trauma, from witnessing someone else's sudden illness, from losing someone too fast, from feeling like you missed the signs once, and you won't let that happen again. It's the body trying to protect itself by always being alert. But the price is constant worry, constant checking, constant fear of being blindsided. And it's isolating. People might joke, roll their eyes, say you're always overreacting, but they don't see how real the fear feels, how your brain turns uncertainty into threat, how even being told you're fine can feel like a delay in bad news. But maybe the fear of illness is also a reflection of something else, the desire to live, to stay, to matter. You scan for danger because you want more time, more days, more mornings. And that's not weakness. That's love, for life, for people, even for yourself. So, if you carry this fear, know you're not alone. And maybe healing won't come from silence or certainty, but from learning to sit with the unknown, to say, I'm scared, and still breathe, to say, I'm not sure, and still go outside, and to remember that being careful is okay, but being present is better. Anthropophobia. It's strange to be afraid of people, not because they're dangerous, but because they're there, looking, existing, expecting. Anthropophobia is the fear of people, not just crowds or strangers, but sometimes even those closest to you. It's not about disliking humanity. It's about feeling overwhelmed by its presence. Every conversation feels like a performance. Every glance feels like a question. Every room feels like a test. Your mind runs through possibilities. What if they judge me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I can't handle their energy, their attention, their silence? Unlike social anxiety, which focuses on specific moments, anthropophobia can feel more constant. A low hum of discomfort in nearly every interaction. Even a friendly hello can spark unease. You rehearse replies. You analyze tone. You feel your body tense, even when nothing has happened yet. For some, it's rooted as past trauma, a betrayal, a humiliation, a long pattern of not being understood. For others, it's tied to sensitivity, to a nervous system that picks up too much, too quickly. A room full of people becomes a storm of voices, expressions, expectations. You feel like a small boat in turbulent waters, unsure where to anchor. Anthropophobia often leads to withdrawal, canceled plans, ignored calls, deep loneliness that comes not from being abandoned, but from choosing isolation over the fear of being too exposed. And yet, beneath the fear is something tender, the wish to connect, but safely, the wish to belong, but without pressure. You don't want to disappear, you just want to exist without being watched so closely, without having to explain every emotion or justify every pause. So, if people feel like too much sometimes, that doesn't mean you're cold. It means you're careful. Your boundaries are built from experience, and honoring them is a form of self-respect. Maybe the world wasn't made for quiet souls, but that doesn't mean you don't have a place in it, even if it takes time, even if it takes distance, because the ability to love humanity from afar is still a kind of love. Nosocomophobia. Hospitals are meant to heal, to comfort, to restore. But for some, they carry something else, an echo of fear. Nosocomophobia is the fear of hospitals, not just the building itself, but everything it represents. Illness, vulnerability, endings, and the unknown. You step inside and feel your breath tighten. The white walls, the sterile air, the quiet beeping of machines. It's not the place that scares you. It's the memory of what happened there, or what could happen. For some, the fear began with a moment they couldn't forget, a diagnosis, a goodbye, a long wait for news that never came easy. For others, it's the way time seems different inside, slower, heavier, like every second is holding its breath. Nosocomophobia can feel irrational. You know hospitals help people. You know doctors care, but your body still tenses when the doors slide open. You smell the antiseptic and remember everything you've tried to forget. The fear isn't always about your own health. Sometimes it's about watching someone you love fade in a place where everything feels clinical and controlled. Sometimes it's the fear of becoming just another chart, another name on a list, another life paused beneath fluorescent lights. You avoid checkups, delay appointments. You reassure yourself it's nothing serious, because the fear of knowing feels bigger than the risk of not knowing. And when you do go, you count the minutes until you can leave. But beneath that fear is something tender, the desire for safety, for control, for life to make sense. Nosocomophobia isn't weakness, it's awareness. An awareness that bodies are fragile, that life changes quickly, that places built for healing can also hold memories of pain. But even so, healing sometimes asks us to return, to sit in the waiting room, to be seen, to trust. Not blindly, but bravely. So, if hospitals feel like too much, Know that you're not alone. You're human, sensitive, wounded, perhaps, but still walking toward care, even if it scares you. And that is its own kind of courage. Coulrophobia. Laughter isn't always safe. Smiles don't always soothe. Coulrophobia is the fear of clowns. And while it may sound lighthearted, it often runs deeper than people realize. It's not just about costumes or makeup. It's about contradiction. A face that's painted to look joyful, yet feels hollow. Movements meant to be silly, yet somehow too exaggerated, too unpredictable. For many, the fear begins in childhood. A party, a circus, a cartoon. You're told it's fun, but something inside you recoils. The voice is too loud, the grin too wide, the eyes too fixed. Clowns are meant to entertain, but they blur the line between real and unreal. They wear a mask of happiness, but the mask never changes, no matter what happens around them. They keep smiling, and that, for some, is terrifying. Because we rely on faces to tell us the truth, to shift with emotion, to mirror the moment, but a clown's face is frozen. One expression, all the time. And when emotion becomes unreadable, trust becomes impossible. Coulrophobia isn't about being silly or immature. It's about sensing something uncanny, something that doesn't feel quite right. The fear comes not from danger, but from distortion, from the idea that someone, or something, is pretending to be human and doing it poorly. It's also about unpredictability. Clowns break rules. They pop balloons, fall suddenly, shout when it's quiet, move when no one expects it. For someone already anxious, that unpredictability is overwhelming. You can't relax. You don't know what's coming. And when fear meets confusion, it turns into avoidance. You skip the party, turn off the TV, cross the street at festivals. You might laugh it off, but the discomfort is real. And underneath it all, coulrophobia might be about more than clowns. It might be about masks in general, about false cheer, forced joy, the performance of happiness that doesn't leave room for anything else. So if you've ever felt your stomach twist at the sight of a painted smile, know that you're not strange. You're simply tuned in to nuance, to danger that hides behind laughter, and to the very human need for what's real, even when it's not pretty. Haphophobia. There are moments when touch heals, a hand on your shoulder, a hug after silence, a small gesture that says, "I see you." But for some, touch doesn't bring comfort. It brings panic. Haphophobia is the fear of being touched, not because you dislike people, but because the act itself feels overwhelming, startling, intrusive, like your body isn't ready to be shared. For some, it comes from trauma, a time when touch meant pain, not safety. For others, it's more subtle, rooted in boundaries, overstimulation, a nervous system that registers closeness as threat. You flinch at sudden contact. You feel your chest tighten during casual hugs. Even a brush of a hand can feel like too much. And the hardest part, it's often misunderstood. People assume you're cold, distant, unfeeling, but haphophobia isn't about a lack of emotion. It's about too much. Your body remembers things before your mind has time to explain. Touch becomes a trigger, a floodgate you can't control. It's not the person you fear. It's the reaction, the spiral, the way your skin feels unfamiliar after, the way your heartbeat won't settle. In a world where affection is often physical, this fear can feel isolating. People mean well. They reach out to connect, but you shrink, even when you don't want to. You smile, even when it hurts. You say, "I'm just not a hugger," because that's easier than saying, "It doesn't feel safe in my body right now." But boundaries are not barriers. They are bridges to real understanding. Haplophobia doesn't mean you don't want connection. It means you want it in your own way, through words, through time, through presence that doesn't rush in without permission. And that's okay. Your skin is yours. Your space is sacred, and healing, if it comes, will arrive gently, on your terms. So, if you've ever felt ashamed of pulling back, know this: you are not broken. You are aware, and that awareness is a kind of wisdom the world doesn't always understand, but deeply needs. Ophidiophobia. It doesn't take a close encounter. Sometimes, a photo is enough, or a sound, or the thought of movement in tall grass. Ophidiophobia is the fear of snakes, and it's one of the most common fears in the world. But it's not just about fangs or venom, it's about unpredictability, the way they move without warning, the way their bodies seem to glide across Earth, silent, smooth, and alien. For some, the fear is primal, deeply rooted, passed down through generations of instinct. Our ancestors learned to fear what hides well, strikes fast, and blends into its surroundings. That fear kept them alive. For others, the reaction is more personal. A childhood memory, a sudden surprise, a story that never left. Ophidiophobia often strikes without logic. You know the snake isn't near. You know it's behind glass. You know the video isn't real. And still, your pulse quickens. Your shoulders tense. You look around the room, just in case. It's not about danger. It's about what the mind associates with it. Stealth, secrecy, a body without limbs, without expression, a creature that doesn't blink but always watches. Snakes defy our usual categories. Not warm, not cold, not loud, not soft. They live in the margins, beneath rocks, between roots, under silence, and that unsettles us, because we fear what we can't easily define. Ophidiophobia, at its core, might not just be about snakes. It might be about what snakes represent. Things hidden, things ancient, things that appear when we least expect them. And yet, the fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. It reminds you that not everything needs to be touched or tamed. Some things deserve space, distance, respect. If your body recoils at the thought, that's okay. Your instincts are doing what they were built to do. And maybe, in that space between fear and understanding, you learn something about yourself too, that you are sensitive to movement, to presence, to the quiet power of things that do not ask to be understood. Bibliophobia. Books are meant to hold knowledge, comfort, discovery, but for some, they hold weight, pressure, silence that feels too deep. Bibliophobia is the fear of books, not just the object, but the experience of reading, of being overwhelmed by words, by meaning, by what might be hidden between the lines. For some, it's about authority, the way books sit on shelves like they know more than you ever will, spines straight, pages crisp, ideas permanent. You open one and feel immediately small, as if every sentence is a test you might fail, as if the words are judging you for not already understanding. For others, it's about memory, a classroom, a red pen, a paragraph that made no sense no matter how many times you read it. The book became a mirror of what you lacked, not knowledge, but belonging, competence, worth. Bibliophobia doesn't always come from ignorance. It often comes from past harm, where learning became shame, and curiosity was met with correction. You start to avoid, to say, "I'm not really a reader," to skim instead of dive, to keep books at arm's length, afraid they'll reveal something about you that you'd rather keep hidden. And yet, you still walk past libraries with a strange ache, still feel the tug when someone talks about a story that moved them, because deep down, the fear isn't of books. It's of being left out of the worlds they hold, of not understanding the code, of being handed a map but not knowing how to follow it. In some cases, the fear isn't intellectual, it's sensory. The smell of old paper, the density of text, the stillness required. Books ask for time, attention, presence, and in a world that rarely slows down. That can feel like a threat. But the truth is, no book expects you to be perfect, to finish in one sitting, to remember every line. Stories wait, ideas unfold at your pace, and you don't have to be fluent in literature to belong in its pages. You just have to be willing to begin again. So, if you've ever closed a book halfway through and walked away, know this: you're not alone. You are still curious, still worthy, still capable of meeting meaning on your own terms. The fear is just proof that words still hold power. And maybe that means you do too. Triskaidekaphobia. Sometimes fear doesn't need a face. It only needs a number. Triskaidekaphobia is the fear of the number 13. A fear so common it leaves traces in architecture, in hotels, in airplanes. No 13th floor, no row 13. Some buildings skip from 12 to 14 like they're dodging a ghost. But why? It's just a number, right? And yet, the discomfort lingers. For some, it's superstition, a sense that 13 is unlucky, cursed, wrong. For others, the fear is harder to explain. It's not about math, it's about meaning. 13 feels off. It disrupts patterns, breaks symmetry. 12 feels complete, months, hours, zodiac signs. 13 feels like something extra that doesn't belong. The fear often hides in small decisions. You avoid making plans on the 13th. You notice it on a calendar and feel a flicker of tension. If something goes wrong that day, you wonder, was it the number? Triskaidekaphobia isn't loud. It's quiet, subtle, cultural, passed down in stories, in caution, in rituals. It sits in the back of the mind like a whisper. Maybe it's better to be careful. And even if you don't believe it, you feel it. A small hesitation, a pause, a decision made sideways. And maybe that's what makes it so interesting. How easily fear can attach itself to something neutral. How much power we give to patterns, to coincidence, to narrative. Because fear, in many ways, is a story, a way of making sense of chaos, a way of assigning cause to effect. Something went wrong. Must be the number, must be the day, must be the sign. But numbers aren't good or bad. They don't hold intent. They don't plan outcomes. Still, we build meaning around them, hoping that if we follow the rules, the universe will stay kind. Triskaidekaphobia reminds us that logic doesn't always rule the mind, that even the most rational person might still knock on wood, avoid black cats, hesitate at floor 13, not because we're foolish, but because we're human, looking for signs, reading between lines. trying to feel safe in a world that offers very few guarantees. So, if you've ever skipped a seat, a step, a date, don't worry. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you understand that belief shapes experience. And sometimes, even a number can carry a story worth listening to. Dissociation. Some fears don't chase you. They wait quietly. At crossroads, at menus, at inboxes. Dissociation is the fear of making decisions. It's not about indecisiveness in the casual sense. It's the deeper anxiety that any choice, big or small, might be the wrong one, that once you choose, something will be lost forever. You feel it in the grocery aisle, staring at two versions of the same thing. You feel it in career moves, in relationships, in questions like, what if, and, but then, and, am I sure? The world becomes a labyrinth, and every turn feels like it might lead to regret. For some, it's rooted in the past, a decision that ended badly, a mistake that cost too much. For others, it's about perfectionism, the desire to optimize every path, to predict every outcome, to control what can't be controlled. So you wait, you delay, you overthink, you ask others, you research endlessly, you imagine alternate timelines, and none of them feel safe, because what if the one you pick closes all the others? Dissociation is the fear that life has only one right answer, and that you'll miss it. But life isn't a multiple choice test. It's a path built while walking. Most of the time, you don't know what's ahead until you're already halfway there, and that's terrifying, because we're taught to choose wisely, but rarely taught how to trust ourselves. So, we stay stuck, not because we don't want to move, but because moving feels like gambling with what little certainty we have. But here's something the fear won't tell you. Not choosing is also a choice, and even wrong decisions often lead somewhere meaningful. Dissociation isn't weakness. It's sensitivity to consequence, to meaning, to change. And that sensitivity deserves compassion, not shame. So if you find yourself frozen at a fork in the road, take a breath. Know that no path guarantees peace, but no path is final either. You can reroute, rebuild, begin again. The fear may never fully leave, but with time, you'll learn to walk with it. Step by step, choice by choice. Chromophobia. Colors are supposed to bring life. They brighten rooms, signal emotions, spark memory. But for some, they bring discomfort, unease, even fear. Chromophobia is the fear of colors, or specific colors, or colors that feel too much. It sounds strange at first. How can something so natural, so everywhere, be frightening? But fear rarely follows logic. For some, it begins with intensity, bright reds that feel aggressive, deep blacks that feel consuming, yellows that vibrate too loudly in the mind. Certain colors trigger visceral reactions, racing heart, shallow breath, a need to look away. For others, it's rooted in memory, a trauma linked to a particular shade, a smell, a sound, a moment etched forever into the presence of a color, and suddenly, that color is no longer just visual. It becomes emotional, associative, loaded. In some cases, chromophobia shows up as a need for control. People surround themselves with neutrals, whites, grays, tones that whisper instead of shout, because too much color feels like too much life, too much unpredictability, too much exposure. The world becomes easier to manage when it's muted, predictable, still. But fear of color isn't always about aesthetics. It's often about safety. Some colors demand to be seen. They pull focus. They enter a room before you do. And when you're someone who prefers invisibility, that's terrifying. Because color is expression. It's vulnerability made visible. To embrace it is to say, I am here. And not everyone feels ready for that. Chromophobia also reflects how deeply we respond to our environment. How even something as seemingly passive as a color palette can stir discomfort, memory, resistance, but maybe, in that reaction, there's something worth listening to, a reminder that you have boundaries, that your nervous system is paying attention, that not everything bright is beautiful to everyone, and that's okay. So if you've ever flinched at a painting, or felt overwhelmed in a store aisle, or avoided a color without knowing why, know that you're not overreacting. You're responding, and in time, you may make peace with the palette, or you may not. Either way, the world still holds space for your shades of quiet. Anthophobia. It sounds almost poetic, to be afraid of flowers, the softest things, symbols of beauty, love, and peace. But anthophobia is real. It's the fear of flowers, not because of allergies or thorns, but because of something quieter, harder to name. Sometimes it begins with associations. A hospital room filled with lilies, a funeral bouquet that marked an ending, a gesture that came too late. In those moments, flowers become more than plants. They become messengers of grief, apology, impermanence. You smell a certain bloom and your chest tightens. You see a color and remember something you tried to forget. And sometimes, the fear isn't tied to memory. It's tied to pattern. The way flowers are unpredictable. They open suddenly, close without warning. Their forms are too complex, too intricate. Clusters of small parts, petals that spiral, textures that unsettle. For those sensitive to sensory input, that detail can be overwhelming. For others, it's about what flowers represent. They are fleeting, temporary, meant to be admired, then watched as they fade. That reminder that nothing lasts is subtle but sharp. And maybe it's not the flower you fear. Maybe it's the timeline it carries. The way beauty is always slipping. The way something can be alive, radiant, full, and then gone. Anthophobia can lead to avoidance. You don't enter flower shops. You cross the street in springtime. You tense up at weddings or gestures of romance, and people don't understand. They say, it's just a rose, just a daisy. But to you, it's more than that. It's fragility in its most visible form, a living thing designed to disappear. And if you already struggle with change, with loss, with letting go, then flowers might not feel like comfort. They might feel like reminders, but the fear doesn't make you cold. It makes you aware of endings, of symbols, of how deeply beauty can stir something in us that isn't always joy. So, if you've ever felt a quiet fear bloom where others saw calm, know that you're not broken. You're simply seeing the whole picture, both the blossom and the fall. And maybe that sensitivity is its own kind of bloom, one that deserves space, even if it never seeks the sun. Esotrophobia. Most people look in the mirror and expect to see themselves. But what if that reflection doesn't feel familiar? What if it looks back with too much knowing, or too little recognition? Esotrophobia is the fear of mirrors, or of seeing one's own reflection. It isn't always about jump scares or haunted stories. Sometimes It's much quieter than that. A discomfort that rises when you catch yourself in passing glass. A hesitation before brushing your teeth. Averted eyes in dressing rooms. For some, it's about appearance. A fear of judgment. Imperfection. Being seen too clearly. The mirror becomes a spotlight, highlighting every flaw, every difference from the version of yourself you wish to be. For others, it's deeper. It's about identity. Looking at yourself and asking, is that really me? Do I recognize the person in that frame? Do I want to? The fear can also be symbolic. Mirrors are portals, not just into bathrooms and bedrooms, but into inner worlds, into memory, into aging, into time. They hold versions of you you've forgotten, faces you've outgrown, moments you'd rather not revisit. Sometimes, the mirror catches you off guard, when you're tired, unguarded, in between emotions. It reflects not just how you look, but how you feel. And if you're not ready to see that, it can be frightening. For some, mirrors feel alive, too still, too knowing. The fear becomes not of what's in them, but of what might be behind them, watching, mimicking, waiting. Esotrophobia doesn't always announce itself. You might just feel uneasy. You might cover mirrors at night, avoid certain angles, turn off the light before looking. And you might not talk about it, because who's afraid of something so ordinary? But it's not the object, it's the confrontation. With your face, with your past, with the version of you that exists only in silence and silver. So, if you've ever felt that chill, that pause, that urge to look away, know this: you are not strange, you are not alone. The mirror is just glass, but what it reflects, that's personal. And if some days you'd rather not meet your own gaze, that's okay. There are many ways to face yourself, and not all of them require a reflection. Noctophobia. Night arrives the same way every day, slowly, quietly, predictably, and yet for some, it never feels familiar. Noctophobia is the fear of the night, not just of the dark, but of everything that seems to come with it. The stillness, the unknown, the thinning of the world. Daylight carries noise, distraction, rhythm, but night removes the background. It amplifies everything you didn't have time to feel. Thoughts get louder, shadows stretch longer. Your heartbeat, usually quiet, becomes a soundtrack. Some say the fear is primal. We are creatures of light. Our ancestors lit fires not just for warmth, but for safety. In darkness, predators lurked. In darkness, we were vulnerable. That instinct never quite left us. But for others, noctophobia isn't about what's outside. It's about what emerges inside. Nighttime is when the masks fall, when you're no longer performing, when you are alone with yourself. And for some, that's the scariest part. The silence reminds you of things you haven't dealt with. The shadows whisper doubts you pushed aside all day. Every small worry grows limbs and walks the halls of your mind. Sleep, instead of being restful, becomes a battle. You keep lights on. You need background noise. You scroll endlessly just to avoid the moment the room settles into silence. For children, noctophobia often begins with imagination. Monsters under beds, faces in closets. But for adults, it evolves. The monsters become memories, regrets, unresolved tension. The dark becomes a mirror, and the fear isn't of something out there, but of what arises within. Noctophobia doesn't mean you're weak. It means you feel deeply. You're attuned to the changes in the air, the shift in energy. While others find peace in night, you find questions. But maybe that sensitivity is a kind of wisdom, a way of noticing the layers others overlook. So if you dread the setting sun, if your chest tightens as the sky dims, if night feels like a weight instead of a blanket, know that you are not alone. You are simply human, navigating the quietest part of the day with the loudest parts of yourself. And even in fear, you are still moving toward morning. You made it to the end. Maybe not every fear was yours, but perhaps a few whispered something familiar. Tonight, you didn't push them away. You sat with them. You gave them names. You listened. And that, quiet as it seems, is a kind of courage. Not all fears need to be solved. Some just want to be seen. And now that they've been seen, maybe they can rest. Maybe you can too. If this room brought you even a little peace, you're always welcome to return. Bring your questions, bring your shadows, or just bring your breath. There are more thoughts waiting to be heard, more quiet corners of the mind to sit with. So, if you'd like to stay connected, to drift through more hollow rooms together, you can gently press that follow button. No rush. It'll be here when you're ready. Until then, take care of that quiet mind. And good night.